Yes, it is. We're hoping maybe to do a part 2, and so we'd want for people to at least watch the part 1.
Yes.
So thank you, Keita, and thank you everybody for joining us.
I'm still having trouble signing in. I'm sorry.
Claudia, I will
Jeanette.
sign. Oh, was that Claudia?
No,
No,
that's
this is
Anne
Anna.
and Jeanette.
Oh, Anne. Anne, I will sign you in.
Thank you.
All right.
So good morning, good morning, good morning. I would love to start with a visual. So if anyone has their cameras off, please turn their cameras on. I really would love to be able to see, even if you're in your car, it's not a big deal. I just want to see smiling faces or whatever faces. So I'm going to scroll through to just take a look at all the wonderful face contact that's happening in this space. And I invite everybody else to also do the same, to take a moment to orient to all the wonderful different faces that are joining and participating in this space. One thing I think it's really important about the fact that we're doing more of these in Zooms is that we are connecting more deeply across the country. I'm in workshops now where there's training to people in different parts of the world. And through this technology of Zoom, through this pandemic, this crisis that we're still finding our way through, we're making deeper connections, and that's exciting. I want to say hello, special shout out to all my BIPOC peoples that are in the house. Wanted to recognize you, all of you luscious, beautiful POC bodies of color. They're joining, and all the luscious, beautiful white bodies that are participating in today's event. Particularly to the BIPOC bodies, I want to just recognize that some of this stuff is things that you've heard, and at the same time, it's important for BIPOC bodies to also know the information that we're all coming together on the same page at some point, building a cohesion, of building a bridge, or to continue this work. The other piece that's really important is that there is going to be a part 2. Part 2 is going to be more the visceral exercises that I'll be introducing today. Without giving away more about what the presentation is, you'll understand what I mean by that. And I also at some point would want to talk to NSAW about holding a BIPOC space for practitioners of color, for how to hold space, particularly for yourselves, in terms of how we're doing in terms of this work as being anti-racist. So the disclaimer is that we all have to do this work as BIPOC, as white bodies. It's really important, but we're all going to come at it from different experiences, levels, and no one gets a free pass when it comes to doing anti-racism work. We all have certain levels of participation to do, and I just want to say it really clear, when you read Kendi's book, How to Be Anti-Racist, particularly or Latasha Morrison's book, The Bridge, these are bodies that are really speaking about how this is a work for all of us to do this work. So I am going to switch over, and I'm a little not as savvy on the Zoom with the, so I'll put my disclaimer out there. So I might have to be like, Lynn, where I'm stuck. So I'm going to switch over now to the PowerPoint. Oh, there will be a break in the middle. So we'll do like a 15-minute break at, I think, what is it, 10. And yeah, so just want to say that we will have a break. All right, without much, no more ado, I'm going to see now how I switch us back over, share my screen, and I believe, let's see. Okay, and I believe this is how I start. Okay. Is everybody, I think I did this right, yay! Okay, so how to develop an anti-racist lens. I'm gonna move this out of the way for your clinical social work practice delivery. I actually want to get out of this screen. Great. So my name, who I am, just want to take a moment about the reference of this experience, include resources not limited to another SCP, Shannon Vicente, who's also an LCSW, and Breathe, Resma McKemmican, Elaine Penderuse, let's see, Ibram Kendi, Candace Rose Venezuela, let's see, and Tommy Lee Woon, and there's many, many more. So this slide will be available later on in terms of this information. So don't have to right now. What I really would love for you to do in this presentation is to be present. Do not worry about taking notes. In fact, I do not want you to take notes right now. If there's some little personal things, sure. A lot of us tend to dive into these type of trainings very cognitive oriented. And I'm gonna ask you to begin in a different way. And why? Okay, there we go. So here's the learning objectives for today. Building the container. Being able to recognize your limitations. Identify. So building container will begin with recognizing limitations as a response to freeze, fawn, flight, or fight, and also the identifying, embracing this work as you're moving through these things. We talk a lot about social work transference and counter-transference. And as an SEP practitioner, we embrace this idea of transference and counter-transference, particularly in this work of developing an anti-racist framework. So let me, so guidelines for engagement today. Stay engaged, speak our truth, experience discomfort, accept discomfort as growth, agree to disagree, step up, and step up, we'll go through all of these. Step back, permission to be raggedy. And I always put anything else, but let me just run through these. I think we know pretty much what we mean. Whenever I work with clients, whenever I do my consultations, whenever I work with group and organizations, I always bring these guidelines, and I'm going to ask all of us too. And so today I'm going to ask you to step out of your duties, roles, responsibilities, expectations as practitioners. I would love for you to step forward just as you. And so permission to engage in these guidelines for your growth. Okay. I think these are permission to be raggedy is really a term that I coined that really means sometimes we don't always have the words or the cognitive understanding of what it is that might be coming up, emerging from our bodies, and we get tongue-tied in our language. So I'm asking you not to become tongue-tied. In fact, to be raggedy, to come forth with whatever is coming up with the understanding that you will be met and we'll be able to clarify whatever that may be. And part of being able to do that is also building the container. So building container, why is this important? Because the issue of race is visceral, not cognitive. If race is visceral, then we need to build a container to help identify racialized emotional fragility, also known as white fragility. And I say racialized emotional fragility because this happens in BIPOC bodies as well as white bodies, right? Huh. And I don't know why it's not moving to the next one. Okay. Breathe, ground, and resource. As you participate in this experience, you will learn to pay attention to your body. So I like to just read you, move you through a couple of exercises, an exercise right now. Whew. So everyone, no matter where you are in space and time, we're connecting through this video, this medium Zoom. And I'd love for you to begin to relax the body by noticing the support that your spine may need. So taking a moment to notice how you're sitting, where you're sitting, noticing if your back is connected to something or if your back needs support, a pillow, a chair. Noticing your feet, are they touching the earth? If they're folded underneath you, rooting down through your buttocks, through your root chakras, through your sit bones. And now I'm going to ask you to exhale deeply, allowing the inhalation to take care of itself. And as you exhale, begin to scan your environment, noticing the exits, noticing the doors, noticing life happening around you. So take your time. And when you notice, I want you to slowly scan the room, allowing your eyes to wander rather than to think of looking at a spot. Notice where your eyes softly gaze. And now in this space, thinking of a person or an animal, or maybe there's a special place, or maybe you're already in that special place that makes you feel happy, secure, safe. And bring that person or image or that space into the space that you've just created. And feel that person, place, or thing in your heart, in your bones. So closing your eyes now and feeling that. Feel what it feels like with that animal, that place, that person that represents happiness, joy, or security is there. So create that felt sense in your body. Whew. And now pause and notice the here and now. So this is the place, this grounding, this resource means that throughout this time together this morning, if there's ever a place in the dialogue where you start to feel constricted, you start to feel small, you start to feel like you don't have breath, know that you can tap into what you just created, this resource that you just created, and actively participate in titrating to that space, actively participating consciously in checking out into that space, but you're still checked in. So that will be throughout today, this morning, your place of resourcing. Recognizing limitations and capacity. Take an exhale as we move forward. So we've all heard these terms, freeze, fawn, flight, or fright, and we know them as stress responses. There's a thing, some of you may not be familiar with fawn. There is a, fawn is kind of like the idea of Stockholm syndrome, I guess is the best way. Fawn is when the person, in order to survive, maybe identifies with the person or the situation, tries to accommodate. You see this a lot in domestic violence, a lot of power dynamics. A person will try to accommodate, appease, and this is an idea of fawn, which is different than freeze. A lot of people think of freeze, right? Freeze is like deer, dead, and the headlights, freeze, and so people sometimes get confused with fawn and freeze. So I just want to make that clarification. With practice, we can learn the ability to move through our stress response and patterns of fear. This is, and you'll see why this is important as we move forward. So what is essential for developing an anti-racist lens? Developing an anti-racist lens, I want to move my picture out the way, begins in your body. That exercise we did is building the container, the framework for being able to move through what will be required, what shows up, and these places where we can find ourselves stuck, frozen. But all of our phrasing, race relations, racial schisms, racial justice, profiling, white privileges, even white supremacy, serves to obscure that racism is a visceral experience, that it dislodges the brain, dislodges the frontal cortex, right? Blocks airways. Remember, fight or flight, we get tense. Rips muscles, extracts organs, cracks bones, breaks teeth. We saw this with the Floyd tape, George Floyd. You must always remember that the sociology, the history, the economics, the graphics, the charts, the regressions, and all the lab of great violence upon the body. So take a moment now, feel that, exhale it out as you build capacity. Just a recap, a real quick stress biology recap, understanding how stress, the threat affects the body and helps us understand. So this is just a very broad brushstroke about the autonomic nervous system and the parasympathetic and sympathetic. Again, just take a moment to view this, because what happens with that fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, right, is that there's a biological thing happening. When we all saw what happened with George Floyd, there was a biological, visceral response that happened. This is even what happens with us in our practice when issues of race, oppression, discrimination, and it shows up even with our clients within our own body, our own nervous systems, and with the nervous system of the person we're trying to work with. So this is just a broad brushstroke to remembering this biology. I want to pause for a moment. If there is a question that comes up, type it into, I guess, Lynn, and I also would like to be able to answer questions as we move along. Again, another vision of, this is Porges's view of the autonomic nervous system, Stephen Porges. Remember, there's an environment outside. So when we oriented this morning, and I had you look around the room and the space, right? There's an outside environment, there's an inside, and they're always communicating through the senses, the eyes, the nose, the mouth, the little hairs on hairs on our body, the skin. All these things are taking sensory input, right? So we're always assessing safety, danger, life threat. So again, just going back to the biology of stress to understand how this shows up, even when we're having these, when we are dealing with ourselves and holding another body, another nervous system across from us. So part of the piece about always holding this stress and these tensions, especially today, with the racialized tension in America. So one of the things about the racialized tension in America is that someone else said, wow, things are getting worse. And what I would say to that, and many other riots have said, is things are not getting worse. We just have social media today. We have things that are able to document today. And we have this instant availability of information, right? So our nervous systems are getting this stuff, and we're also getting overloaded, right? So we have to think about all this intake. When we think about when things are building up. So if we think about particularly BIPOC bodies, and I don't want to just focus primarily on BIPOC bodies, because the idea of race and developing anti-racist framework is also about white bodies. It's not about focusing on people of color. In fact, white bodies need to have a better understanding of how it lands on your own body, right? On white bodies. And so if I think about these years of this stuff that's been happening, then we have to ask us the question about, where do we release? So again, going back to some of the physiology of the body, right? And so we talk about the blood pressure, heart rates, we do yoga, we do all these things, and yet there's accumulation happening. People need to feel supported, so white and brown bodies need to feel supported to release these charges of energies. We think a lot, and we go to the thinking. Now here's a piece that's counter, like the vista, right? But part of a stress response is also the overthinking, the overanalyzing. Why? Medicinal cortex is trying to help us rationalize the fear that we're moving through. And sometimes that in itself builds up more fear and anxiety about the other, and especially in the systems and these idea of thinking about, how can I be anti-racist in my practice? So again, you can take a moment to see. Okay. Objective 3, the ability to identify, embrace, and work through. So we've already talked about, there's a physiology happening with the body. There's a nervous system that's taking information from the outside to inside. We've talked about pausing and recognizing. So right now, I'm curious I want to just pause here. See, how do I get out of this? And I want to take a moment to check in. I think I can just do a stop share. And just check in for a moment to ask people, not a cognitive, but back into your body right now. Check in, each of you take a moment to check in. Notice, if you can be the observer of yourself in this, notice what you notice right now. What are you feeling? What are you experiencing? Notice if the brain is racing to answer questions. I just want everybody to take a moment to notice for a moment, and then open mics and a couple of people just call out what they're noticing right now, just for a moment. How you doing?
Sadness with respect to George Floyd and just the pervasiveness of the situation.
Okay, so sadness.
Exhausted.
Exhausted, right?
Present. I think that the time you took to help us all center and really be in our bodies was just really effective, and I'm really excited for this training.
So present. Thank you, Susan.
Tight jaw.
Your jaw, J-A-W. Did I hear someone?
Tight jaw.
Yeah, it's something in your jaw. Okay, yep. Ellen, yep. Hi, Ellen.
I have tightness in my belly, I noticed.
Yes. A lot of tightness in belly, right? Okay. I want to come back to that, but go, anybody else?
Tension in my shoulders.
Shoulders, okay. belly. Anything else?
I feel like I have a bunch of crystal shards in my chest around my heart.
Yes, right? The heart. Oh my gosh, yes. We'll take one more.
I feel a sense of heaviness in the center of my chest, like this deep grief has just kind of come to rest there like a weight.
Okay. Great. So let's take a moment, everyone, to check into those feelings. Now, you all just express this like, oh, snap. I'm just like, ugh. So imagine that when you're working with people. Right? It got real fast, real quick all of a sudden, didn't it? Right? And the piece and the thing that's important is that we're human. We have our fragilities. So these are the pieces, and we'll get to this piece around transference and countertransference. So these are the pieces that is real, right? I heard a lot of people talk about heavy. For a moment, for the heart, I want to just talk to the heart for a moment and the chest area. You know, with the way things are right now, our heart and chest is there's a grief, there's a protection, there's a whole bunch of stuff in the heart area that's happening, right? And we want to protect the heart. And that's why there's so much pain. If we were to, I'm going to go off a little bit right now, but if we were to think about this heart area in relationship to being present today and these things, we talked about environment outside, environment inside, and the two are always connecting. They're always talking, right? So the heart, all of us as human beings, that heart is connected to, and maybe somebody's volume's a little bit high, that heart is also connected to love. Like this may sound kooky right now, but that is the essence, the quintessential of being human, that heart piece that we're struggling with in terms of our identity, our as individuals, as practitioners, as caseworkers, as people in the world. So when we hear all this stuff that's happening around us right now, the heart, the chest becomes heavy. This is important. We'll be, in part 2 of this, I'll be talking more about this stuff as it relates to you, but also how to help hold that space for the other people you're working with, and that relationship between the cross-cultural, the multicultural. So right now you said, I feel heavy. The people in the room that you're with feel it too. You can't hide that, guys. It's no more different than like a kid or a pet that picks that stuff up, like a child, right? And so it doesn't mean anything's wrong, but it's important that we're able to metabolize that energy, be able to name it and own it in our practice. And this is the stuff that also gets in the way around our emotional fragility and our racialized emotional fragility. Does that make sense? Yeah. And for BIPOC bodies who've been living this, Black, Indigenous, people of color, BIPOC bodies. Whew. On one hand, when I do this workshop, and I've been in a workshop with only BIPOC spaces, this piece about exhaustion too is real. Just want to just reach out to BIPOC bodies that are in the room right now to acknowledge that I see you, I feel you. And a lot of times in these types of trainings, when I used to participate in them, I never felt like no one is hearing my pain, because there's a lot of attention on white bodies right now, bringing white bodies up to speed, if that makes sense. Does that make sense? Whew, so take a moment to exhale out whatever you're thinking right now. Let's not hold on to that. I'd like to invite you to exhale that out through your pores in your body, not to hold that right now, right? Because that goes into the thinking brain, and then we start going into all the other stuff that wants to protect us from the feeling that we're feeling right now, whatever that is. And for BIPOC bodies, sometimes it's rage. Because, like, y'all just coming to the party now? Really? So all bodies are invited in this moment. All right, I want to get back to the screen. Ta-da. All right. Let's see. So objective 3, the ability to identify, embrace, and work through transference and counter transfers as necessary space of building trust, working with POC clients, families, communities as white and POC practitioners. So it's important, people of color clients, that we are building this space, not only as white bodies, but also as POC bodies, because there's a myth around that I, as a person of color, don't have my own racialized biases with other bodies of color that look like me. So my space holding is going to be a little different than my white body allies and partnerships. And yet we're all doing the same work as we are building this trust, this built on that container, understanding the biology of fear or stress or fight or flight. Woo. Now we're going to start working through it. And why? Because power is the primary issue of race. So let's pause right there. Because power is the primary issue of race. Starting with the basics. I never start these presentations, y'all, with the assumption that everybody has a basic understanding. In fact, I can't tell you how many times many people, particularly us in the field too, do not have our own basic understanding. So I'm going to start again with broad brush strokes about some basic understandings of defining ethnicity, nationality, particularly as they're confused with race, right? So when we think about ethnic roots, there are particular groups of people that share common interests, ancestors, trait, traditions, language. Again, before the world was made up of distinct nations, countries were associated with ethnic groups, right? And so I listed some of them. I want to take a little pause here. So and you can read the slide, when I used to do diversity work in some of the rural areas of Maine, Oxford, well, at the time I was living in Portland, so places like Aroostook and Oxford County were rural Maine. Now I live in these places, up in these places, so it's different. But back in the days when I lived in Portland, thinking Maine, there's a whole other Maine. I used to go around and do Kwanzaa presentations and Martin Luther King presentations and things like that, and different diversity pieces. And I remember particularly most times when I would come into these all white body spaces, it's important as I talk about this, they would say to me, gee, I don't know how much diversity here, kind of nervously chuckle, because we're all white. And I would be like, yes, great. Because usually the work that I came in to do, using Elaine Penderhuse's work, by the way, understanding race, ethnicity, and power. This work has me go in and start to have people talk about their ethnic roots. So by the time the training was over, that room was no more white. That room was Franco-American. That room was Jewish. That room was Catholic. That room was Irish, Italian. And some of the pieces we landed with was, so how did you all become white? And what did you give up? And many people would lament around the fact that they gave up their cultural currency cards, their language card, which included language, traditions, customs, even identities, which became whitewashed in order to become white. Really important. Stay with me. So what is this thing called race? And I want for each of you to take a moment to pause. I'm actually going to come out. What is this thing called race? And I would love to actually hear a couple of responses. What is this thing called race? Oh, before you respond, notice what's happening in your bodies right now. So again, take a moment to check in, and even be the witness of watching you right now. A lot of you are probably in your brain, right? Because that's where we like to go, right? And that's okay. Just notice it. That's all. And what is this thing called race?
Go. The way I understand it is it's kind of a cultural, historical invention kind of brought on by the groups in power in order to kind of rationalize, subjugate, oppress groups not in power and differentiate themselves from those groups.
Thanks, Allison.
Say more external characteristics.
External, tell me more. What do you mean?
I guess it can be superficial, like color of skin, just patterns of physical features, like size of nose, size of body parts, and all that.
Okay. And is it Dea or Deja?
Deja.
Deja. Thank you.
For me, my understanding of race is that it's a social construct and it doesn't have any roots in anything but, biological or anything like that. Kind of to be built on what was said, it's rooted in something that's superficial and designed to keep people in their classified positions.
Yeah. Two more. There's no right. I really want to hear people. What your thoughts? What is race?
Race is this combination of the seen and the unseen, of this social fantasy that has to do with bodies and how bodies appear, that becomes rooted in our bodies as this visceral, lived experience, and that becomes rooted in our minds as this fantasy that we sign on to and are constantly seduced into signing on to all the time.
I love that word, seduced to signing on to all the time. Yeah, thanks, Judy. Anyone else?
Well, I guess I just wonder too if it isn't, I mean, I think there's a lot of political and social things ascribed to it, but also just an awareness of differences. And I just, my mother told the story of when I was very young, and the first time I saw a Black man, I said, "Oh, look, he has purple hair and, green skin," or something, to that effect. And so it just, it's also an observation, perhaps. I don't know, but I think it has gotten much more complicated.
Yeah. I think you're right, Claudia. Is it Claudia? Yes. Okay. I want to take a pause here because something is coming up. So I know Lynn said that she would be uh, um, willing to, it seems like there should be a pause right here about do a quick breakout before we do our break. So it's 9:45, and I would love for 15 minutes. We'll come back and then we'll do a break, and then we'll come back from that and then continue. But I would love for you to go into breakout groups. And here's what I would want. Now I do need you to write down a paper and take a paper and pencil. I would like, the question would be to write in your group, maybe a group of 3 to 4. What's your earliest memories of difference, however you define that, growing up? What were your earliest memories of difference? 2, where did you grow up and what were the ethnic groups in your community that you grew up? So ethnic groups, earliest memory of difference, where did you grow up, and what were the ethnic groups in your community that you grew up? And 3, what are your earliest images or memories of race? 3, what were your earliest images?
Keita,
Yep.
Danielle has wonderfully written the questions into the chat. And
Okay, great.
I will cut and paste them when people go, so that you will see it
Okay.
in the breakout rooms.
Great. Thank you so much. You guys are awesome. I appreciate that.
And you want 15 minutes?
Correct.
All right. So I'm going to put you in your breakout rooms now.
Thank you, Lynn.
Ready, set, go.
So Lynn, you're not putting me in a group, correct?
I will take you out, or you can take yourself out and put yourself back in the waiting room.
How do I do that?
when you get in there, or I can yank you out once everybody gets in.
Okay.
I just need for people to join these rooms. Trying to get people to join their rooms.
Herding cats?
All right, I'm going to put the questions in. What are your There we go. All right.
Thanks, Lynn.
Oh, you're welcome. Here, I can put on my video here. You'll just see me.
So now it's just you
now
and I.
You get to take a breath.
Actually, I think I might take a quick.
Go, you go.
Yeah.
these like simplified definitions kind of limit our understanding. And
Yes.
it,
I appreciate that simplified definition limited our understanding. I want to just pull up for a moment this idea of differences and mystery and curiosity, right? So one of the things around race is, and someone says about the narrowness of whiteness, even like the illusion of whiteness and that narrowness, right? I think that was Deja. So I'm throwing up these terms because on one hand, we have natural human curiosity, mystery, staying open, right? And the other time we have these narrow definitions about the otherness and creating the space in the otherness and the codedness around what that otherness. Someone said the codedness, we didn't say black and white, but it was coded in that concept, right? And then in that, then we have this whole other this spectrum that we won't get into today about the colorism and how that plays out amongst all of us different ethnic groups. And remember, like, I think it was Linda who's talked about growing up in Hong Kong, and like for her it was like, ooh, when was the first time I saw white? Right? And that piece and the values and the differences. So we all have that as human capacity and pieces. I think is to remember these narrow definitions that we're operating out of. And so if part of this can perhaps is that someone talked about that curiosity and mystery, that it might be something worth exploring, but more for ourselves rather than a voyeurism. And we can talk about that differently later. So on that note, it's about that time. Yes, it is. We will take a 15-minute break. So that means it's 10:15, 10:30, we're coming back. And then we're going for 45 minutes, I believe.
Can I share just before, just
Yes.
to share really, I feel urged that I want to say that, just my reflection and observation of that color binary and power is embedded in, it's just, I'm hearing when people's memory about, when white people hearing memories about colored people or people of color, it seems like it's always there.
Go ahead.
They're lower, right? They're lower. The poor kid, the kid that, buzzing, there's always lower. And it's just interesting that I noticed when I noticed the difference is like, oh, I think I remember now the first white person I saw was on TV is the governor of Hong Kong. And the power and the lower. Does that make sense? It just
absolutely.
Bad.
Absolutely.
In our memory, we are trying
Absolutely.
to look for the lower part of people of color.
Absolutely. And Linda, thank you, because that's going to be the segue for coming back to understanding that memory. Sorry, this light's getting in my eye. We will go into that and understanding that piece, that snapshot you just described, which becomes embedded into the psychic consciousness of not just white bodies, but for all bodies when we think about this concept of race. So thank you for bringing that. And on that note, let's take that 15-minute and come back at 10:30.
All right, please turn off your cameras and get up, stretch, and we'll see you soon. All right, Keita, I'll see you soon.
Okay. I would love to everybody just turn on screens, everybody's visual to come back online so we can all orient to each other. So if you have your cameras off, don't worry about if you have a bad hair day or if you're scoffing down lunch or something, breakfast maybe. Just take a moment to orient to everybody in the room. So just through eyes, it's just a cognitive, a viscera and cognitive recognition of everybody in the space, everybody showing up. So just take a moment to gaze at everyone just for a quick moment, screen through the slides and through eyes. You just get to say, hey, hey, I see you. I see you. Welcome. So we're orienting back to each other, orienting back to each other. Beautiful. And take a moment to, as you orient back to each other, to step out of the break. So coming back to this space, right? And by orienting towards each other, we're helping each other become present, stepping out of whatever space we were just in. And softening heart, softening diaphragm, softening belly, as you stay in social engagement through the eyes. So part of this is practicing social engagement through eyes and staying present. And if anything comes up, it's just a sensation. Try not to feed it with a story or a narrative. Simply take in through the eyes and notice your own projections that might be occurring. So welcome back, welcome back, welcome back. Beautiful. It's so nice to see so many of you participating and holding space together. So thank you for showing up and being part of the space holders. All right. So let me start my timer. Beautiful. So Linda left us with a very important observation question. And I think this leads us right into the next paces. So I'm going to dive right in, go back to my screen share for a moment. See where we are. Da, da, da. And, oh, because I'm not there. Doc. Okay.
And Keita, can I just interrupt?
Yes.
If people
Yes.
could please type their full names into the chat again as they're signed back in, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
So I like to give a minute for people to do that, so you're not feeling torn between two tasks. So I'll give another minute. Because I know I am a slow typer. Oh,
And Anne, I will type your name in again because I see you there.
Alrighty. Let's dive a moment. What is this thing called race? And again, take a moment to pause and notice you. Notice you is a practice of you stepping out on the balcony of your life and looking down at yourself in this moment. And that's all that is required. So remember, no need to take notes. The requirement is just your attention to yourself in this moment. That's all. And we've touched on this, right? So classification of human beings, again, about purpose of giving power to white people to legitimate the dominance of white people over non-whites. This is a really interesting concept. And this started out in 1866. And we have to remember the context, the American Civil War at the time. There's a lot of context, historical context. This was the time of Blumenbach and Buffon's classification of man. And here's an important piece. we're thinking about Linda's observation. So here's what this concept of whiteness was differentiating. Someone talked earlier about differing from what's normal, what's not normal, the us and them, right? So savage was words used to describe Africans, indigenous people of color, with the exception of the Chinese, and we'll get there. And then we have semi-civilized, and so this is where we get that term model minority from, that somehow the Chinese population, according to this time frames, were once civilized, but now the society was in arrested development. And you have to think about the magnificent history of China in the context of this and the colonization of Britain in China. So, right? They were once civilized, but now they're society, right? So think about that. And then we have the civilized, and we're not even understanding the context. We have an idea. And civilized people were European, Aryan, Semitic peoples, right? And again, let's not get into right now, people notice what's happening in your body. These are broad brushstrokes. They're not definitive all. There's a lot more information. So notice the body's response to some of this stuff that is welling up, okay? So then we have the eugenics, which is the time, and eugenics was actually around before 66. And Frederick actually got this from eugenics and classification of men, right? And it's important in that dialogue today when we think about eugenics. So we have these things called bad genes, good genes, and here's just a historical connotation of this idea of eugenics and classification of men. So again, we're starting to build this power and this legitimate of dominance and normalization, right? And England and France will rule Africa. Africans will dig the ditches and will water the deserts. It will be hard work, and Africans will probably become extinct. We must learn to look at the result with composure. We must learn to look at the result with composure. Really important, composure. So there's certain calm, a certain normality, not hyperbole, not emotional, composure. We must learn to look at this result with composure, certain disattachment. You think about a disassociation. It illustrates the benefit law of nature, that the weak must be devoured by the strong, right? And this was in 1864. Again, note the date. So pause. Here's that dominance, that power piece that we're building. Reflect, tune in. Do not get stuck in what's coming up right now. Let that emotion, let that thing move through you. Race is a false classification of people that is not based on any real or accurate biological or scientific truth, right? A race is a political construction. Someone mentioned this. It's something being created by people that is not natural development. A construct created for political purpose. If we think about the word of Negro, the concept of that in terms of justification of slavery in America, right? We do this in the military. I have military family. There's that piece around the othering that we have to do in order to destroy the enemy, right? Because they're not like us, right? They're the enemy. And a lot of times we have derogatory names for the enemy so we can object, so that we can have a certain level of composure so we can destroy another human being. The concept of race was created as a classification of human beings with the purpose of giving power to white people, right? We just said this. The truth is we're actually made up of different ethnic groups. America is the progeny of this. That's what, if we actually have an opportunity here, but I'll stop from that for right now. Many people like to make the ethnic distinctions to hold on to their ethnic culture and identity. For example, like we see something like Italian American, Chinese American, ethnicities Italian, nationalities US and American. So we have these ways that people are still trying to identify with some of their ethnic roots. And of course, ethnicity becomes more confusing. The process of immigration and assimilation, assimilation in terms of this, and immigration is a big thing that Kendi talks a lot about the assimilated identity as it relates to race in America. We know that the case of China has been many ethnicities and diversity groups that get lost, and how this is really important. You know, when we reduce a China, we take the term Chinese America. If we look at China, for example, there's huge, it's a continent with different North China, South, like there's like different contexts, but yet we lump all Chinese people, and I have quotation now, as Chinese America, right? And there's multiple dialects, right? And the same thing goes to now for Africans who are immigrating from Africa, who are now in the term African American. We just wiped out all of their ethnic identity. So we have to think about that, those pieces. Like, you know, so for, again, going back to China, there's like, right, over 50 ethnic groups in China. Think about how many hundreds of those there are in the continent of Africa. So it's a really bigger, someone said the narrow whiteness has a narrow definition, and so are these catchphrases. Question, what did Europeans give up in order to become white, and why? So let's just pause. I kind of alluded to this a little bit earlier, but let's take a look. So I'm going to show you some images. This was, again, the profile of Negro. This is back in the time of Darwin, in time of Baffoum. So we're going back actually earlier than the 1800s. And this was the classification of man. This is important when we think about what happened in the Congo with the Belgians, the Belgian taking this classification of man with the Hutus and the Tutsis and exploiting pain and suffering. Groups of human beings fought all over the world. We know that there was always tribal wars. Even in the Americas here, there were tribal wars with different indigenous populations. Man was fighting all over the world. But taking this eugenics approach, this craniosacral, this model that then suggested that anyone using these images, these measurements, whoever was closest to whiteness in terms of a craniosacral measurement, became the way that we started to classification of man, humans. So here in the 19th century, the separate pieces of anti-Asian legend. We have to remember the earliest immigration law was based on the Chinese Exclusionary Act in America. Really important. I want you to just pause. Here's a caricature, but this is, look at the way that the cartoon image is capturing Chinese people. Same thing we saw in the other picture, right? More animalistic pictures. And this is what everybody, this was a socialization, the building of American culture. Manifest destiny, right? Whoa, and look at those terms today in terms of individualism, pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, right? So we wiped out people, make a land dash for land, and we put what's left of a population, if they weren't extinct, into these government-controlled reservations. We have them right here in Maine with Sabayak, Eastport. I've been there. Just pause and notice the emotions, the things that are coming up. Take your time and just begin to notice. I love this picture because it says, get a home of your own. This is important when we think about class in America. It's important when we think about the idea. This picture right here is actually the antithesis of the Monopoly game. Like, so if you ever knew the Monopoly game analogy was that, imagine I like to say it like this. Imagine you were invited by your neighbors to come over and play the game Monopoly. But then when you got there, you realized they had started the game 2 hours before you did. Then you came, they were like, oh yeah, here's your $200. And now you can go, you can join, right? And think about what that had set up for you then as you go around the board. You would be owing everybody everything, wouldn't you? The two safest places on that board would be Park Place. Hopefully you win whatever's in Park Place, or in jail, because at least in jail, you're not owing anybody anything. Just want to pause, take a moment. Culture, this is important in terms of us in the field of social work. Culture-free service delivery is non-existent. This was written in 1980. We are trapped in our history is trapped in us. So the questions I'm asking you to ponder for a moment is, what do these statements mean for the field of social work? Culture-free service delivery is non-existent. And also, as you answer this question, who were the early reformers of social work? So I'm just going to pause and come back out for a moment. What do these statements, how do these statements land on you? Not what do they mean, how do they land on you when you hear these statements? Culture-free service delivery is non-existent. We are trapped in our history is trapped in us. What do these statements mean for the field of social work? Who were the early reformers of social work? So I'm going to hear some feedback, and I'd like to hear also from some people who haven't had a chance to be heard, to take up space. When you hear this is not an intellectual exercise, it's a visceral. So what's coming up when you hear this in terms of the field of social work and our practice?
I can go.
Yes.
I think what's coming up for me is like, my heart's like racing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that happened also with the slide before, the land for sale. So it's like kind of continuing right now.
Okay, so take a moment there, just like, woo, this is where I'm at.
Yeah, I'm angry.
Okay, yeah. And take a moment to find breath before you just rush over that, all right? So we're slowing this down just for a moment. This is so important, so thank you for demonstrating this, Abby. Hey, Abby!
Hi.
This is Ann.
But when Abby's finished, we're gonna let Abby finish talking. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I think with social work too, I'm thinking of just like this like false reality of us being like separated and unbiased and like not affected, and just that like kind of old frame of, I think of like psychology and social work that kind of has that distance, and even boundaries is coming up, which is interesting for me, and thinking about what that means.
So a lot of questions, right, Abby?
Yeah.
Okay. And we're not going to answer them today, right? No. And so give yourself space and time as you tap out for a moment to just stay attention and pay attention to those things without the intention of trying to answer them today, but just noticing like, wow, this is here. Whoa. Thank you for tapping in. Annie.
Well,
which one? Janet.
And Janet, right. Those messages landed very heavily and they were overwhelming. And I just never thought of going way back there for the beginning of this behavior that we see now. It's been around.
Right? And heavy is in your body. Thank you for bringing it up. Like, oh my gosh. So everyone take a collective exhale. Ah. And I mean a really long exhale to exhale out all the stale air. And if a sound comes, let it. Let's do another one. Ah, I'm moving that shit through. And I have to use the word shit here. It's not to be inflammatory, but it makes a point, right? Like, ah, holy snap. I'm holding on that. Woo! Shake, 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 flick, 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 flick.
Yeah, I gotta echo that that heaviness feeling, because it's the feeling that I was trained to be aware of early on about that power differential of being therapist and then there's client. But laid on top of that is my whiteness. So two sources of power feel heavy to me right now.
Yeah. And that's important that you're feeling, this is the other Anne, because that statement before about this sense of composure, which is a classic cognitive dissonance effect. So I'm going to remain composed and detached, which is the weight that you're actually feeling now that's showing up hundreds of years later, if that makes sense. And I'm getting into intergenerational historical trauma, which is more about part 2, right? Like, whoo, because we always think about historical trauma as like for Black bodies or brown bodies or Indian bodies. We don't think about it as for white bodies. So that weight that you're feeling right now is like, oh. Okay, we're gonna go back in for a moment. All right, so remember, when you start feeling those pieces coming up, permission to exhale, try to stay out of your head, try to stay out of the rational, and try to stay in the feeling. We're bringing you back to your felt sense. That's the objective as we move through this. All right.
I'd like to add something,
yes,
Eva here, which is, it's really interesting to do this, the difference between what I think and what I feel. It's as if my system goes into a freeze. I don't feel. It is distant. It is away. It is nothing that I relate to.
Yes.
And that is always interesting to me, to say how generationally, and it's interesting as a Jewish American woman, I think I do that around my own culture, because it's scary to be Jewish these days, you know? And it's like, wow, the freeze. And I'm working with that because it's such an important piece to come out of.
Yes, great. Is it Eva?
Eva.
Eva. Thank you for bringing your space into space. I'm going to pause there because there's so much we could go into, but I want to go back in, and I think we're going to get to some more of these pieces, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Keita, can I interrupt for a second here?
Yes.
I wanted to bring, now I just lost.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay, it's okay.
Go ahead.
Just a piece in the chat that I wanted to bring forward is, I think of the social justice aspect of social work identity and how it can sort of excuse us from acknowledging that this profession was also rooted in white supremacy, white saviorism, white exceptionalism,
absolutely,
classism. Then there's the added layer of power, privilege, dominance, authority, expertise, etc., within clinical professionalist discourse.
Yes.
I'm so appreciating the intentional attention to embodied experience and sensory somatic grounding as we explore all of this.
Thank you, Lynn, for that good judgment call, bringing that in, and for the person who wrote this.
It was Glenn.
Glenn, okay, thank you. And what's important about this, and I'm glad, I'm not using those terminologies. You said Glenn or Gwen? Gwen used specifically because that's the piece that gets us trapped in our brain, right? And what you just said is describing all this as we're moving through this viscerally. And they're both right. Does that make sense for people? You can open your mic and say yes if it does or no if it doesn't.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So on that, becoming anti-racist, when to jump back into the slide for a minute. Here's the zones, right? many of us are in the fear zone for different reasons. I avoid hard questions. And so some people say, well, I don't deny racism, but we avoid the hard questions. And the questions are really about ourselves. And someone else said, I think it was both of the Anns, well, also the Abbeys, who also said, that's the hard stuff, right? Asking these questions, right? I strive to be comfortable, because when we ask, also Abby talked about the discomfort, the dysregulation that's coming up in our body. And that, and I have to say the word again, shit again, is intense, right? And so it's an important piece to know, and even for us as people of color in this piece, not so much a denying, but I don't want to go there. I'm avoiding. I want to be comfortable. I'm to check my life for different reasons. And this is not about saying that BIPOC bodies are wrong, but it's just recognizing the fear zone, that heart piece we talked about, that gets, I gotta have boundaries and protection. And through that, right, the learning zone is the recognizing, the seeking, the uncomfortable, being vulnerable. And so people of color, we also have our own pieces around that looks very different. And then here's the growth zone. And all this to me is also, if anybody knows adult learning theory, adult learners, this kind of echoes some of that. We'll just move forward. And again, you'll have this handout. Don't write stuff down, because I'll be giving this to Lynn and she will be handing this out. So why do social workers need to understand race as the key to efficacy for service delivery and clinical practice? Okay, this is an important piece. Woo! Down to your boots. Without a critical anti-racist lens that acknowledges the historical and contemporary just causes for Black, Indigenous, and BIPOC youth. And I'm taking this from Rose Venezuela, who does this work in school systems. And she gave me permission to use it. So some of the language in here talks about youth, but it's the same, right? We can change. So, but this is important too for people who are working, because I did school-based, for Black and Indigenous youth. Traumatization, trauma discussions inadvertently paint students and families in a deficit light. This goes back to something Linda said, Linda Lee, I think. Deficit in the capacity, ability, safe and healthy relationship to their white or wealthy counterparts, of course. So hang in there, hang in there. And she also says, if you're not actively anti-racist, hold on, you cannot be trauma informed. And if you watched Resma's video, his work, you would understand some of this. You get some glimmering of understanding this. And I sent that link out as a prerequisite for this course. It's okay if you didn't look at it now, that's okay. You can go back and look at it later. In fact, you can check out more of his work around that. He has an extended video version of the free one. This is important. If you're not actively anti-racist, you cannot be trauma informed. And I will have some discussion on that. It says, can you point out examples of transfers and counter transfers within this scenario? Think of a time when you find yourself in a similar situation with race in regards to your own practice. Using coded language to police students' behavior when it falls outside the bounds of white normative politeness. Trauma-informed education then acts as another way schools assess that the white body is the right body and the right way to be a learner. So thinking about this in terms of examples, just take a moment. And now I'm asking you to come back into your thinking brain of transference and counter-transference in this scenario in places where you may have found yourself unconsciously, because it's embedded. We looked at the cultural understanding, the historical understanding of how we got here. I'm going to move forward. And so becoming an anti-racist social worker requires, actually there's another slide here and I'm not sure where it went. Okay. Understanding navigating race is visceral, not cognitive. Continued education of dynamics of race and the history of racism in America and the world. It requires the ability to be humble, to listen, to learn, and remember growth, development can be scary and challenging, of course. It's a lifelong practice of active engagement. The piece about white privilege and white supremacy is I get to check out. I get to check out. Whereas brown and black bodies are always in tune to ad nauseum, right? To practice being an anti-racist social worker requires some grammatical, being trauma-informed understanding and the impact of racism and discrimination in the context of trauma and ACEs. We haven't touched on the adverse childhood experience or the adverse lived experience. Again, I take a deeper dive in this in part 2. And finally, humbleness, practice, and patience, essential characters for anti-racist commitment and leadership. Remember, emotionally, we respond to information through feelings. When a racial issue strikes us physically at a physical level and causes internal sensations such as anger, sadness, joy, or embarrassment. Intellectually, our primary response to a racial issue or information may be categorized by personal disconnect from the subject or a steadfast search for more information. I gotta figure this out. I gotta learn, right? Our intellectual response, often verbal, based in our best thinking. Morally, we respond from a deep-seated belief that relates to the racial information or event. This belief has to do with the rightness and the wrongness of a given racial issue. Justification for one's moral views are often suited in the gut and may not be verbally articulated. Socially, we connect and respond to racial information through our doings or what is most often categorized as specific behaviors and actions. So remember, there's an emotional, there's an intellectual, there's a moral, there's a social, and the socially, I like to think about the terms of socially in terms of social engagement, like the social engagement of today, right? When we look at each other's eyes, we're just kind of socially engaged. And what does that mean? So in terms of a practice, particularly that client that you're working with, that social engagement is going to be critical for dismantling, for neutralizing the tension, the emotional fragility that's showing up in the room in between you guys. So this is, I think this is the last, yep, the end of that slide. And we have about 15 minutes. How do I get out of that thingy? La, la, la. Share screen, how to get out of it. Okay, I'm not going to spend a lot of time stop streams. There. I think I got out of it. Okay. No, there's a lot. We have about 15 minutes. And the way I'd like to end today is to be people to think about, or actually, I used the wrong word. Reflect on for a moment. What are you taking away from today's presentation and bringing back into the practice of your life? Everyone, I'd like to hear at least one thing. There's probably many. I'd like to hear from a few to ask, what is one thing you're taking away from today and bringing back into the practice of your life? And that one thing that's important to you, not because of the profession, but what are you taking away to bring back into the practice of your life?
To me, it's about paying more attention to how I feel instead of being so inside my head. And I think as social workers, we tend to be inside our heads a lot and overthink things, but instead just focus on the feeling and come from that place of genuineness and respond from how I'm feeling.
Thank you, Sarah. Anybody else? What are you taking away today, bringing back into the practice of your life?
I agree with Sarah. So So I
And then
agree
you're
with
next,
Sarah.
Patricia.
The other thing is that I'm very, when you had asked where we were, after we saw that series of, you explained the history, and you showed us that circle that showed the different stages of racism. That made me hopeful. It took me from being kind of really stuck in the anger and the sadness and more towards hopeful. And particularly the comment of culture-free service delivery is non-existent made me hopeful. Just recognizing that, you know, and if I had an office, I would put it in my, I would almost think of putting it in my office and having it there to remind me to talk about it with my patients or with my clients, and to recognize it and honor it. So that's
Thank
it.
you. Thank you, Julie.
Hi, thank you so much, everyone, but especially you, Keita. What I guess I want to say, what I'm taking away is like, I feel exhausted and burnt out by the world. Part of why I came to social work was to do something about that. But part of why I, you know, get so exhausted is, so I guess I'm taking away from this, like me dealing with and connecting to my feelings and my experience as a trauma survivor and my other ways of identifying is actually where I can get my energy and my strength to work, because I'm a place where if I don't figure that out, you know, I can't be effective. And I see, you know, I want to be with my patients. I want to be part of the solution. And I find myself doing all this, a lot of it is intellectual. So I'm taking away, breathe, feel, keep talking to other people who are doing this, because I'm in my own little world if I don't do that. So thank you.
Thank you, Patricia, for sharing that. Yeah. Others, what are you taking back into your practice of your life?
I'm gonna say, can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, because I was having trouble with my mic before. I'm gonna say self-compassion, because there's a sense of shame that, you know, as you spoke last time and today, Keita, it's like, it's so obvious. How could I have missed it? Like I'm in therapy, you know what I mean? And carrying that, having that embarrassment and shame, which is just gonna lock it all up. It's like, okay, let's not get stuck there. So let's have compassion and figure out why I was doing that, not seeing what was so obvious to me now in just a week. I mean, you know, but to kind of like Patricia, to take that energy and move it on the front side, not get stuck or go back and be all like negative about it and about myself. So self-compassion and empathy, or
I would like to thank you, Margaret. I'd like to hear from any, it's always hard to ask this, but it's important too. So are there any people who identify as not white, but like that, who would like to speak about what you're taking away from today's practice? Has something helped for you today? That would be really important for me to hear.
Well, for me, it makes a lot of sense in terms of like holding feelings in your body. And when you said fawn, kind of like holding on to patterns and stress responses, I feel like it made my environment, because I live like in a predominantly Black island, there's a lot of crime. Everybody's just can't understand like well, why are these kids, like, why can't they manage their emotions? Why are they always getting into fights? Why are they always killing each other? And especially the course that you sent us for before this talked about intergenerational trauma and how all that anger and rage can pass down through generations. And it just made all of it make more sense that, you know, we can't fix these individual children. Like, it's never going to work. Like, we have to kind of address the trauma that we've all kind of passed down as being like descendants of slaves. So, I mean, that's something I'm really going to take away from this.
Yes. And if I may, for white bodies in the space, you also get to unpack what someone said to me one time. She said to me, you know, there's never been no 10-step program to deconstruct slaves and to deconstruct slave owners. And I thought, holy snap, you're on the program, girl, write it. But that's an important piece, right? Because everyone's talking about, particularly Margaret, you just ended like, I've been blown away here, like, duh, like, but really, right? And so there's like all this, so you're trying to navigate all this crap, and Deja's talking about the historical implications of this, intergenerational history, the historical context. So for example, they say, it's not just about these individual behaviors. Yes, there's I can work with you, but there's also this collective piece. So I always like to remind that white bodies too have to work at decolonizing what it meant to be slave owners, and people will say, well, I wasn't. We have to remember back to that Monopoly game, right? The descendants of that, and today it comes up in veterans. My family, half of my family is veterans. So like when people came back from the Civil War, we have to remember when Blacks were promised 40 acres and a mule type of things. And that didn't happen. But white soldiers had money and pay. What does that do? That builds capital to go to do the land dash even. They have the resources, right? So when Black soldiers, and they weren't only that Black soldiers, we're just about out of time. There weren't only Black soldiers. We have to remember too, there were some indigenous soldiers, there were some Chinese, Asian soldiers, I want to say Asian soldiers in there that didn't get. We saw this in World War I and World War II with the GI Bill. That there's discrimination that happened when vets came home and didn't get their monies, their pensions, which allowed a lot of GI vets to come, the vets to come home and this middle class rise of middle class household. This is all in your history books, but we don't make the dots. And so now we got angry kids of color, youth community, right? Try to figure out who are doing the piece that we all know in social work, right? I can't attack y'all, but I'm gonna attack each other. I'm gonna attack us, right? Before you leave too, we're getting ready to get to time. I just wanted to say there will be a part 2. I do dive deeper into the intergenerational pieces and some more specific questions around anti-racism as a social worker, with some other connections with people who've done this work. So I have like another slide thing that I'm putting together. I would love for you to join for that. And I would like for you today for a moment to let go of this breath, exhale out for right now, the heaviness that's around your hearts for everybody, and particularly BIPOC bodies, particularly bodies of color. I want to say to you, I know you've been holding this weight for a long time. And a part of me doing this work is so that we can all share the burden. We all get to hold the work together. So amen and men. I'm so thankful for all of you who showed up for today, for the practice of your life. for the practice of my life, and may we remember the practice and the compassion for all of our lives. And Ashe, until I see you for part 2.
Thank you, Keita. I have to come in and do the logistical piece again,
Okay.
and recognizing that we probably could have had a full day or several days, but the realities of Zoom, it's not good for us to sit in front of computers.
No.
So we've made the decision to kind of break things up, and as soon as the second date is set up, you'll all be getting that. As you know, this has been recorded, and give us a week to get it up, because it sometimes takes a long time to download and upload and all that good stuff. It should be up on the NASW main website. Give us a week. But thank you so much, Keita, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day and weekend, and we'll be in touch. Thank you so much.
Lynn, did you want to check in for a minute or something?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and also if you can send me the
Yes.
PowerPoint,
Yep.
I'll send it out with the evaluation.
Okay.
So you'll be sending us the evaluation?
Yeah, as soon as Keita sends me the PowerPoint, then I'll attach it to the same email that will go out with the evaluation.
Great, thanks.
And
And then we
I
just
try to limit the number of emails I send out, even though I get prolific after a while.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All righty. Have a good one.
You too.
And Lynn, also, I think I listed, I just realized I didn't make a separate slide at the end, maybe for reference, but it was in the first slide, and it was also a lot in the sign-up sheet, the description. Should I still do a slide with references at the end, or?
You know what I think I'll do is, because you have the references in the first slide, is I can also make all of those resources that you provided are on the NASW main website.
Okay.
We added, so there.
Okay. All right, cool.
Refer people back to that as well.
All right, good.
Okay.
All right. And I do have another question for you, Lynn.
Yeah,
Sending
absolutely.
so it's a big, do I have to compress it or something to send it? Is the PowerPoint slide big?
No,
like
it should fit through email fine. What I
Okay.
will be doing though is making a PDF out of it. Yeah.
So maybe I could turn mine into a PDF or
You
something
could do
and then
that
send it.
if
Okay.
you want to do that.
Yeah, because then I think they'll be easier to send.
Oh yeah, because you're working from Mac, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, please do save it as a PDF. Otherwise,
Okay.
I'll get it. It's like, what do I do with this thing? Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Perfect. Okay.
All right. Well, thank you.
As soon as I get that, I'll send out the evaluation to everybody. I hope you have a great day, Keita. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.